right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants event. My name is Joe Grabowski, and I'll be your host for today. For those who might be new to Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants, we're all about bringing science, adventure, exploration, and conservation live into classrooms across North America and beyond. So with the school year back in full swing, we're broadcasting 30, 40, even 50 live events into classrooms each month. So this month, our theme has been ocean plastics. It really is a global issue with up to 8 million tons and more plastic entering our ocean each year. So the equivalent of about a dump truck every minute. So we've been connecting with scientists, with explorers, with filmmakers, with artists from all over the world who've been sharing their plastic stories, sharing their research, sharing how they document and bring the problem to us, and as well looking for innovative solutions to tackle this global issue. So I'm really excited today to have some of the crew of eXXpedition joining us today. They run pioneering all-female sailing research expeditions to investigate the cause of and solutions for ocean plastic pollution. So before COVID, they were on their round-the-world expedition with a plan to cover 38,000 nautical miles, including 4 of the ocean plastic accumulation zones, or gyres. So we're joined today by Dr. Winnie Courtene-Jones. She's a marine scientist specializing in ocean plastic pollution and has researched this topic in a variety of environments, from coast to some of the most remote parts of the deep sea. She is the science lead for the eXXpedition, and she is based at the University of Plymouth in the United Kingdom. We also have Sally Earthrowl joining us today, a keen environmentalist, adventurer, and geography teacher. So she spent time in Bali, where she witnessed firsthand the impacts of plastic pollution, but also how passionate people can make a real difference. So as the mission leader, she is mostly found out at sea during the voyages and doing outreach for these events. So let's bring them both in. Hi, Winnie. Hi, Sally. Great to have you joining us live today.
Hi.
All right. Awesome. Well, I know you have some exciting stuff to share with us today, so I'm going to let you take over for a bit, and then we will take some questions from our groups joining us.
Sounds great. Thanks. So I assume my screen is now being shared for everyone to see.
Yes, front and center. We're ready.
Oh, excellent. Let's go. So yeah, as Joe said, thanks for the intro. I'm Sally Earthrowl, and I'm the mission leader for eXXpedition. And I'm just going to, in the first instance, talk you through a little bit about what eXXpedition's all about. But to start off with you, to give you a bit of a flavour, I'm going to show you this video clip about our round the world expedition.
Forecast for the next 24 hours, Viking, north of Sierra, south of Sierra. Cyclonic, becoming northwesterly 5 to 7, decreasing 4 to showers.
Every day I wake up, I choose love, I choose light. Every day I wake up, I choose love, I choose light. Every day I wake up, I choose love, I choose light. Every day I wake up,
We now know there are over 5 trillion fragments of plastic floating on the surface of our ocean. There are many times that have sunk to the depths, so deep in a place that we can't even measure them. Trying to clean up these microplastics is the most enormous challenge, and the solutions start upstream on land. eXXpedition Round the World is an all-women sailing voyage studying plastic and toxic pollution. Over 2 years, 300 women will sail 38,000 nautical miles, exploring 4 of the 5 oceanic gyres and the Arctic. We have 3 main goals. One is to do solutions-focused science. We need to get out there and understand what type of plastic is in our ocean, and therefore where is it coming from, so that we can stop it on land. Secondly is about communications. We all know we have an issue of plastic in our ocean, but we need to move that narrative along to actually talk about what that problem is. The fact that it's microplastic and the fact that it's sinking means it's so hard to clean up. And thirdly, it's about building an army of inspired change makers. These 300 women who've been out there, seen the problem for themselves, firsthand, understand what the solutions are and the role that they can play in solving it. What we realise is there's no silver bullet solution to solving the marine plastic issue, but we need to be working from every angle, from every sector to solve the problem here on land.
So that should have given you a bit of a flavour of what eXXpedition's all about. And as Joe said, we're currently, although we're on pause, we're sailing 38,000 nautical miles around the world, carrying out this solutions-focused scientific research. But it's no ordinary journey, because we've split it up into about 30 voyage legs, and you can see the different pink dots on the map represent the different places that we're stopping. And on each voyage leg, we have 10 guest crew. So 30 times 10, that means we're taking 300 women with us on these voyages, helping and contributing to the scientific research and having loads of discussions around what skills they have and what they can do to really tackle this issue and share the story back on land to enact change. Which is a really exciting role to play, being both an adventurer, researcher, and obviously educator and explorer. But I haven't always been out at sea. I was a teacher, as Joe said. I'd spent some time living in Indonesia, and it wasn't until I moved to Indonesia that I became acutely aware of this plastic problem. I'd gone out there, I was expecting to see these beautiful, idyllic paradise islands, and yet the reality I was faced with was quite different. There was litter on every street corner, entering the water systems and making its way right out into the ocean, onto the beaches and out into the water, and being swept away by the various ocean currents that Winnie's going to talk you through a little bit later on. And it was with this that I really started to question what I'd been doing with my waste back when I used to live in England before I moved to Bali. What had happened to it every time I put it in the bin? Had it been being recycled? Had it been going into landfill? Or had it be being shipped abroad or out into the ocean? And so I started to look further into it and came across these shocking statistics that 80% of ocean plastic pollution actually comes from land, and that looking at those beaches in Bali, those paradise kind of Sunday afternoons I was looking forward to, actually ended up quite often being beach cleans, intercepting some of that waste and cleaning it up. And it was really upsetting to see such a beautiful environment having a real impact from our way that we live our lives as human beings. Now, when I lived there, I was a teacher. I had some amazing students that were really keen to get out there and make a difference and protect the island that they called home. And so we did do a lot of beach cleans, which is a great way to understand more about the type of waste, but also a great way to intercept that waste and take it out and stop it from going into the ocean. But we were really shocked that every time we returned to the beach, the waste had returned as well. So we need to start to look upstream, away from the ocean, and what we can do to stop it getting there in the first place. So we asked this question about recycling. Why can't we have more recycling bins around and put more of our action into making sure that our waste actually gets utilised in the correct way? And a really shocking statistic is that actually about less than 9% of plastic actually gets recycled. And all those numbers, you can see the triangles, those recycling symbols at the top of the screen. I used to look at these and think that they just meant that that item could be recycled, but actually some plastics are really difficult to recycle. Lots of our products have different types of plastic or different colours, different properties. We've got soft plastics like in plastic bags, or hard plastics you get in toys, and it became a real problem for us to recycle it effectively into usable products. So then we needed to start looking at what we could actually do, because we've got this amazing material that's designed to last forever, yet it's used on all of these items that are designed to just be thrown away after maybe 15 minutes of use. And those items are hanging around on our planet somewhere. So every plastic item that's ever been made is somewhere on our planet. And it could be anyone's, and sometimes it's quite obvious that you see them on your streets and you know that they've come from the local area, but sometimes when they enter the ocean, they can travel for miles on these ocean currents, often breaking down into smaller pieces called microplastics that can end up far away from their origin in a completely different country. So it really is a point that we then discover that we're having a massive impact on our planet, and that 5 trillion plastic fragments are floating on our ocean. And you can see those tiny broken down bits of plastic that I called microplastics. They're smaller than your little fingernail, and Winnie's going to tell you a lot more about how they're created and how we're carrying out our scientific research into them. And it's then at this point in my life that I heard about eXXpedition. And I joined a voyage that was sailing from Hawaii to Vancouver in Canada, and we were sailing across the North Pacific. And in the North Pacific, you've got some very interesting ocean currents. So the movement of the water means that you've got an accumulation zone where lots of that plastic gets collected. And we were sailing straight through it, or our plan was to sail straight through it so we could carry out our scientific research. But before we set off, we went to the beach, and I was shocked to see the very different types of plastic waste compared to what I've been seeing in Indonesia, in Asia.
Today we're on the east coast of Oahu, and we're looking at what plastic is washing in. Oahu, one of the Hawaiian islands, really sits on the edge of the North Pacific Gyre that we're going to be sailing to next week. The plastic on this beach, it literally could have come from anywhere across the Pacific. America, Canada, Asia. A lot of it is single-use plastic, a lot of containers. Right here we've got a toothbrush. We've got a couple of pieces here which are interesting. You'll actually see along here that there are some teeth marks. Today's been brilliant because it's the first day that our eXXpedition North Pacific crew have all come together. The crew is made up from amazing women from all over the world. We have 6 different nationalities, but most importantly, a really diverse skill set. We have got journalists, artists, scientists, teachers, filmmakers, policymakers, and product designers. So people who can both look at the challenge, share that message, and also think about solving it.
Joining that first voyage really changed my understanding of this issue of plastic pollution. And it also provided the opportunity of not just understanding more about the issue, but coming to grips and really understanding a huge amount about what each and every one of us can do to make a difference. Emily, the mission director who was speaking on the video, spoke about the fact that all of us were from different backgrounds with different skill sets to look at tackling the issue. But what she didn't mention was that we were all sailors, because we weren't. And that's part of what I love about eXXpedition, is that you don't have to be a scientist or a sailor to be able to get involved in the research and in the programme. But it does mean that life can be a little bit tricky when you first step foot on a sailing boat, particularly when you're going straight into the trade winds, which is winds that specific global wind patterns that mean that you can have some quite rough seas.
In the last 48 hours, we've had wind, waves,
rocking and a rolling.
The food has been delicious.
Eaten a lot, slept a lot, and helmed a lot.
Very wavy conditions last night.
Gusted up to 40 knots.
In a squall in the middle of the night.
Full moon and stars.
I've never been so afraid of drinking water.
Not being sick,
More sick than expected.
Threw up in the wrong direction and got sick on my forehead.
Challenges of trying to cook noodles at a 45-degree angle.
I'm trying to use the loo at 45-degree angle.
I think I've seen a turtle.
I managed to cook some lunch in my underwear.
Singing Fleetwood Mac at the top of our lungs.
I really enjoy everyone here, and their company makes me kind of a release about that seasickness.
It's been wonderful.
And we're almost heading in the right direction for the gyre.
So it was an interesting first few days on that first voyage. I did manage to wipe the sick from my forehead, you'll be pleased to know, but you can see there the angle of the boat was quite extreme. But after a few days and with a lot of camaraderie and laughter on board, we managed to really get stuck into the scientific research. And that was the start of my journey with eXXpedition. But it's going through this process with all the crew on board. We're out in the middle of this beautiful blue ocean, and we really get to understand the need to protect this thing that it covers over 70% of our planet, and it's really kind of important to ecosystems and everything back on land. The need to protect it is obviously really, really important. But on the voyage, because we're cut off from our normal everyday, we don't have emails, we don't have social media, we have some real space to discuss all of the issue, but the science and all the facts, but also share our ideas around solving this plastic crisis. And we have some really rich conversations with everyone on board where we're looking at what our unique skill sets are and where they intersect this issue, so that that's the point where we can really have the ability to make a real difference when we get back on land. And that's the point. We've got this amazing kind of group of women and can then get back into their own communities and take action in whatever sphere of influence they have available to them, so that, you know, we can really make a difference across the world in terms of behaviours and innovation, upstream solutions around plastic pollution. When we're on board, we're also carrying out some key scientific research. This is a very unusual photo where Winnie and I are both on board at exactly the same time. We both lead on these missions, so we're not on the same mission. So this is quite a unique, unusual image. But I'm now going to hand over to Winnie, who's going to give us some much more detailed insights into our scientific research programme.
Thanks, Al. So, yeah, whilst we're on board, we carry out scientific research to study plastics. If we pop onto the next slide.
I
so
can't see you, by the
our
way, Winnie.
main aims are to... Okay, no worries. So our main aims are to quantify, so investigate the amount of plastics and the different types of plastics. We're interested to know their distribution, so where they've come from and where they may have originated from, what products they may have come from. And ultimately, all of this comes together to provide evidence on how much plastic is out there, the sources, and how we can best make the best solutions, the most effective solutions to reduce plastics in our oceans. So the majority of plastic originates from land, and that's where we start. So we carry out street litter surveys where we're walking transects of the streets to monitor what plastic items that we're finding. We also carry out beach cleans, and we visit waste management facilities. On the next slide, you can see a waste management facility that we visited in the Galapagos Islands. So here they don't have a very sophisticated waste infrastructure, it's just a small island. Whilst on the next slide, you can see, oh, maybe Sal's mute yourself, yeah, cool. So this slide here shows plastic bottles that were in a waste management facility in the Azores. So another small island, but this time off the coast of Portugal, so in the North Atlantic. And here they ship 14 tons of plastic bottles back to the mainland each month because they don't have the waste infrastructure, they don't have the space on their small island to deal with this. So we're trying to understand those challenges that are faced by the communities in each of the countries that we visit whilst we're sailing around the world. Next slide. But our main research is actually when we're on board and when we're sailing. So this is just a short video that shows some of the scientific research that we do to look at microplastics in the surface of the ocean.
Right now we've got the manta trawl in the water, and this is taking a surface water sample. We're really trying to understand what plastic is floating on the surface, and also how did it get there? Where's it come from? So once we take that sample, we will have a look at it on the deck to take out the pieces of plastic. We'll go down below and then we'll run it through the FTIR to find out what sort of polymers we've actually got in these samples. But it is challenging to do on a sailboat. We have used the spinnaker pole here to rig the manta trawl off the side of the boat. So it's always cutting into fresh ocean that hasn't been disturbed by Travel Edge's hull. We then have to adjust a lot of lines to get it to float perfectly on the surface. We don't want it diving and we don't want it skipping because we need to be able to get a really clean sample. So it stays in the water for 30 minutes and it's really just taking a sample this wide, and it's amazing how many pieces of plastic that we find every single time, especially when you look out here. And I mean, look at it right now, it's completely perfect and blue. And you just think that cannot possibly be a piece of plastic in that ocean today, and it comes up full of fragments every time.
So these are some of the samples that we find, and these are the microplastics that you've heard us talk about. And as Ali said, they're small plastic items. Now these either originate through the fragmentation, so the breakdown of larger plastics items into smaller ones, like plastic bottles, shopping bags, plastic crates, or they can be manufactured deliberately to be really small. So there's plastic pellets. You can see a black pellet in the sample jar there on the screen. And these are pellets that are shipped around the world and they're melted down by the plastics industry to form the plastic items that we use on a daily basis. And now because these are very small, they can get spilt during shipping or during unloading on the shores and go out into the environment. But also textile fibers. So the majority of the clothes that we wear are made of synthetic plastics. So polyamide, polyester, if you look at the label in the back of your top, you might see some of those names. So that's actually a plastic. And these fibers can come out of our clothing as we move or as we wash our clothes in the laundry, and eventually then go out into the marine environment. And it's these types of samples that we find that we collect with the manta trawl. On the next slide, you'll see that we also find items that are more recognizable, this larger plastic spoon. And this was collected in the Atlantic Ocean when we were sailing through the North Atlantic Gyre, these accumulation zones. But this is about 1,000 miles away from shore. We haven't seen land in about a week now. And we just think to ourselves, where has this spoon come from? You know, it's something that we've all potentially used at one point, and yet it's out here in the middle of the ocean, so far away from land and people. When we've collected this, we sieve the microplastics, if we move to the next, into the different size categories. You can see a lot of microplastics collected here. And in the image on the left, I hope it's on the left on your side, it is on my screen, you can see 4 blue semicircles almost, ellipsoid shapes. And they're actually little animals. They're, Sal's pointing them out there with the mouse, there they are. They're small, a type of jellyfish. And you can just see the plastics around them and how difficult it is for us, well, firstly, to filter out those plastics and clean them up from the ocean because they are so small. They're the same size as those organisms that make up the base of the food chain, are so important for other animals. But also, it makes it very difficult for animals to know the difference between what's food and what's not food. What's a plastic? Next slide, please. We also find larger items. So these are some of the things that we saw earlier this year when we were sailing in the Pacific. Very recognizable plastic styrofoam cups, plastic shoes. Next. But it's really the microplastics that are the main issue. And I've put up this image, and if we press the next, you'll see the position of the oceanic gyres will appear. So we've mentioned that word a few times now. And these are these accumulation zones. And now because of the ocean currents, they move around and they swirl and trap debris, so wood, organic material, but also plastics. And you may have heard them called floating garbage patches or islands the size of Texas out in the ocean of plastic. And it's not quite like that. And on the next slide, you'll see us sailing through the Pacific Gyre. And you can see that water behind me there. It's beautiful and blue. And it's not quite the floating island that you might think of.
We're here in the middle of the South Pacific Gyre, currently trawling for microplastics. Gyres are accumulation zones of plastics, but they're not quite the floating islands you might think. It's microplastics, small little fragments of plastic that pollute these areas. And we're trying to understand how many there are and what types of polymers, what types of plastics we're finding in these locations.
And now not all of the plastic stays on the surface of the ocean, but ultimately it will sink down through the water column all the way down to the seafloor. And we are trying to work out as well how many plastics are within the water column. And we use a different sampling method. There's a little video here to show you how we do that.
So we've been using the Niskin bottle method to take samples at subsurface level in the water column. We're using the manta trawl to take surface samples of microplastics, but the Niskin bottle really gets a representative sample of what's going on further down in the water column. What we do is drop the Niskin bottle off the boat, and once it reaches a depth of 25 meters, we send down a messenger which clips shut the bottle at that depth. Then we pull it in and send it down into the hole for sampling. So what happens is the water is pumped out through a very small filter. That filter is then sent off in a petri dish for sampling. We do that 3 times to get a really representative sample of what might be in this area at that time.
So you can see that everyone gets involved in all of the different aspects of the science. So whether that's throwing the manta trawl in the water, looking at what we're finding, how many microplastics in the surface of the water, analysing the contents of the sieves to find those plastics. We answer a whole range of different scientific questions to really build up this knowledge base, this broad understanding of all of the different impacts and different challenges posed by plastics to our ocean, to us, to the animals that live there, and ultimately then inform the best sort of solutions that we can. So on the next slide, not all of the samples get analysed by the crew, but there's a little picture of me back in the labs in the University of Plymouth, where I'm based, and I carry on that analysis back in the labs there to try and build up this picture. So we get some data real time almost as we're sailing, and then some takes a little bit longer with me processing it back in the labs. All right, that's the end of my bit. Sal, you're on mute.
Not from me, I'm not. Joe?
There we are.
Okay, great. Hi again. Yeah, and thanks, Winnie. You can imagine counting through all of those tiny bits of microplastic does take quite a lot of time. So it does take a little while for Winnie to be spent in the lab looking at all of those samples. But when we're on the boat, we obviously, as we've both mentioned, we have 10 women on each of our voyage legs, and we've done 8 of our 30. And like a lot of the globe right now, we've had to pause in our endeavours because of the obviously global pandemic. But we have sailed over 10,000 nautical miles already. We have had 8 crews on board, so we've had 80 women from, I think, about 28 different nationalities. And we've been through 2 of the 5 oceanic gyres already and collected lots of samples to help our scientific research try and come up with some solutions-focused scientific answers to what's actually going on in our oceans with this plastic and toxic pollution and where it's coming from. But one of the massive legacies is this community of change makers who go back to their own countries, their own communities, having had this amazing experience out at sea, carrying out this research and really being to a lot of places on the planet in the middle of an ocean where not that many people have been to. So they've been on a real tale of adventure to couple the scientific research. And it's great to see all of these women now back in their own communities, giving talks, going into schools and kind of starting to stimulate change around what we can all do on land to make a difference. We have paused, but we haven't paused because we are very much looking at how we can make the most of our community and our years of experience in terms of carrying out these voyages and seeing the issue firsthand and the scientific research that goes with it to set up an online platform called Shift.how, which has hundreds of solutions to pollution. And if you do anything at the end of this presentation, along with having lots of discussions in your classrooms, I suggest you check out that website and think about what solutions might be most appropriate for you as an individual or in groups, maybe your class, to think about what you can actually do to take that on and make a difference. And you can see there a snapshot of the website. You've got lots of colourful images to inspire you, but also some real overview of what a lot of the alternatives are, what a lot of the actions are, but also we also go through the pros and cons, the good and bad of each solution, so you can make a really informed, good decision about what solution might be appropriate for you, your class, your school, or your community. So that's a really good place to kind of start thinking about what action you can take to make a difference. And then there's just a bit of information on both Winnie and myself, and obviously eXXpedition and Join the Shift. And take the opportunity to thank you very much for inviting both Winnie and I into your classrooms today.
All right. Awesome. Let me take that screen share down. Winnie and Sally, thank you so much. They're, I mean, amazing adventures that you go on around the world documenting this issue. And, you know, the coolest part has to be each crew comes back ready and armed to get out, spread the word, and do something, make a difference in their communities and hopefully beyond. So really cool. Thanks for sharing the expedition with us so far. And hopefully, fingers crossed, we can get you back out onto the water.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, let's start hanging out with some of our classrooms. Let's grab some questions from them. So I'm going to start off. We're going to visit Let's see. Let's go to Mrs. Noose's group. There's 6th graders joining us in Ackland. Let me bring them into the call here. So Mrs. Noose is representing them because they're joining virtually. How you doing, Mrs. Noose? Oops, let's make sure that mic's ready. There we go.
We are great over here. So my students are using Google Meet to come in with us. So I'm asking their questions virtually as well. They would like to know, you did talk a little bit about the winds and the plastic gathering, but their first question was how you know where to narrow your search to begin looking.
Well, actually, a lot of the best routes in terms of where we might find plastic accumulating are actually the best routes for us to sail because of that wind. So as we're sailing through the ocean currents and the ocean wind that's helping us go on our journey, we're finding that plastic in those same areas. So we put out the manta trawl every day, and we carry out the other surveys when we can, so every day or depending on the weather conditions, to find them. And to some degree, our route is set. We're going to those different countries, but we do have time then on that route to slightly deviate. So to make sure we've got a few days where we can deviate from the fastest course to make sure we get into the gyre and collect the most interesting samples.
All right.
Good.
Before we jump into the next question, Mrs. Noose, Ackland, is that Georgia?
We are in Pennsylvania. We are just outside of Philadelphia.
All right, perfect. Go ahead with another question.
So my students were obviously interested in cleaning up the plastic. So they were wondering how much plastic, if you had like a poundage of plastic that you have collected so far, just because of the experiments that you're doing, just from looking for the plastic, how much have you gotten out?
Yeah, that's a really tricky question for us because the main aim of our mission isn't to clean up, although that has value. I was always taught as a child, if I made a mess, I cleaned up after myself. So it is an important part of the solution, but we are actually collecting plastic for our scientific research. And I don't know if we started in 2014 was our first voyage, and I don't think we've got a collective data from all of those voyages. We started thinking it was be one adventure, and it's obviously grown to be a much bigger research program. I don't think we have that. We have contributed to waste collection. We've done a lot of beach cleanups and cleanups, as part of Winnie was explaining, as our on-land scientific research, where we're looking at the waste leakage and logging what type of waste that we're finding. So we do know we make an impact, but our biggest impact lies in looking upstream at those solutions of what everyone can do in terms of action to make a difference.
All right, let's jump to another live group that we have joining us. This time we're going to go to, let's see, there we go, Mr. Harmon's group. Looks like some grade 6s joining us. Let's bring them into the call.
Hello.
There we go. Hey, Mr. H.
Billy, did you want to share where we're from?
We're from Timmins, Ontario, Canada.
Timmins, Ontario. Very cool. Joining us in Canada.
And did you have a question you want to share?
I'm not sure.
Okay. Josh, you had one? What would you like to share?
Where did you get the funding from?
Yeah, good question. So we have a lot of our funding, we've got quite a lot of sponsorship. So for example, Tomra, that's a recycling company looking at doing bottle to bottle circular economy recycling. They're one of our gold sponsors, and we have quite a few others as well. So we do get some funding from them to be able to increase our impact. But a lot of the amazing women that come on board actually pay for their space on board to cover the costs of sailing and their participation in the program.
All right, so we'll swing back Mr. H's way in a moment, see if they have a follow-up. But we have Mrs. Morrison's class joining us. They are, there we go, Brampton, Ontario, so here in Canada. Now, they're just re-entered the call. They didn't have their mic working before, so I'm going to give a quick check here. and see if that mic is working now and see if we can bring them in to ask their question live. Let's check. Mrs. Morrison, do you want to try and unmute your mic, see if it works for us? Okay, maybe not. So they did send me some questions in via the chat. So let's work in a few of those. So the first one is, Beatrice wants to know, how old do you have to be to join?
You have to be 18 to join one of our voyages, purely because we are going out to sea on what could be a relatively high risk environment. So our insurance policy and safety in terms of, you know, we need to be hoisting sails and on a moving vessel, carrying out our work at all times. So we have a minimum age of 18 purely for the insurance and safety reasons.
All right. And then another question from Mrs. Morrison, 6th graders, is, do you notice something that's the worst polluter? Is there the worst plastic polluter, something you find a lot?
He's going.
Okay, Winnie, we might not say the same thing.
On our street surveys, we find a lot of cigarette filters. So that's something that's dropped a lot in the streets that we're going to, whether that's in the Caribbean, in some of the European countries that we've been to, down in the South American countries as well. Also, food packaging, lots of sweet wrappers, crisp packets, that's potato chips. But when we're out in the ocean, it's much harder to work out the sources of those plastics because they're all broken down into microplastics, so small fragments. But the main types of plastics that we're finding, we can identify them as being polyethylene. So this is a type of plastic, and it's found a lot in consumer products like food packaging, plastic bottles and bags. So I would say that that's a big source of the plastics that we're finding in the ocean.
All right. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Sally.
I was just going to say, what's quite interesting, I think cigarette butts and those filters that Winnie mentioned seem to be an issue around the world. But you do notice, particularly when you're on land, some differences in the type of plastic pollution. Some of then you can look at what's being what's making its way out into our environment on a local scale, which can be quite an interesting part of our study, and that quite often differs between different places. So that's an interesting point too. But you may have noticed in my presentation, the litter on the beach in Bali was very much identifiable waste, whereas in Hawaii, it was those tiny bits of microplastics that had been washed in from the gyre itself, where they'd been out at sea and broken down. So it does definitely vary between locations.
All right. I'm going to bring in Joe. Joe's hanging out with us at home in Wisconsin. Hey, Joe.
Hi.
There you go.
So my question was, when did you start eXXpedition?
Well, actually, neither Winnie or I were part of eXXpedition when it started. Winnie was studying plastics elsewhere, I'm sure, being a scientist, and I was actually a classroom teacher. But it was back in 2014 when Emily Penn, who's now our mission director, and Lucy Gilliam, they're both co-founders, and they had learnt a lot about this plastic pollution issue. They're both sailors, they'd been out at sea, and they'd seen lots of plastic firsthand, where plastic really shouldn't be out in the middle of the sea. And so they decided that it would be a really good idea to take a group of women, particularly because at the time there was a lot of research around the toxic chemicals that might adhere or stick to those plastic particles. And that if those toxic chemicals make it into the food chain, then that can be a real issue for human health. They mimic our hormones, which, you know, everyone has in their bodies, but their hormones are a particularly important thing for women when you come to things like pregnancy. So they decided that why not tackle and take a group of women out to tackle this issue.
All right. Thanks, Joe. Great question. Okay, let's do another swing here. Let's head back to Tim and see if Mr. H's group has another question for us.
All right, you ready?
Nice and loud for us.
Have you ever
ever seen an animal that had garbage in it? That's alive?
Have we ever seen an animal that has garbage in it?
Like, that got hurted by garbage, that's what I mean.
I didn't catch that last bit.
So he's wondering if you've encountered any animals that were being harmed by plastic.
So there's a huge range of animals, about 600 species that scientists have researched that can be harmed, well, we've found that have been harmed by plastic, whether that's a net wrapped around them or through eating it. Whilst we were in the Galapagos Islands at the start of this year, some locals did a diving cleanup underwater, and they were pulling up fishing nets that had sea urchins and other invertebrates, so things like mussels and clams, wrapped in this net. And we were picking them out really carefully so as not to harm the animals, but they can be stuck inside them. And of course, that net is stopping them moving, walking, feeding, reproducing, so they can have a huge range of impacts. But some of the work that I did before I joined eXXpedition was looking at microplastics in the deep ocean, so 2,500 meters deep, that's over 6,000 feet. And I was looking at starfish that live down at these huge depths and finding plastics inside their guts. So this is a real problem, not only on animals that live close to shore and at the surface of the ocean, but all the way down into the deep sea to the very sea floor, we find the impacts of plastics.
All right. Yeah, I mean, down through the water column, Arctic Ocean, I mean, it's everywhere. It's spread all across the planet.
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a pervasive problem, so it's everywhere.
Okay, I'm going to bring Mrs. Noose back in, see if they have another question.
So my students were asking about the process of the garbage coming from landfills and into the water systems and then into our oceans. And I think they were looking for solutions more. Would there be some sort of netting or containment from the smaller bodies of water before they enter the large bodies of water?
Great question. Yeah, so we know that a lot of this waste is coming from land, and we know that a lot of countries might not necessarily have the money or the infrastructure to be able to have really effective management systems. So therefore, we do get a lot leaking out into our natural environment. Sometimes we have landfill sites, so dump sites that are right next to the ocean, particularly on island nations. And just with a bit of wind or a lot of heavy rain, some of that can blow out into the sea. And the same with waste being dumped in rivers. And in lots of places, they have started to look at intercepting that, as you say, in those smaller water bodies before it makes it out into that massive ocean that covers the majority of our planet. And they are using kind of nettings quite often to be able to capture that, particularly where you've got kind of drainage network systems that are man-made coming out of cities, that where the water gets rushed down the drain and kind of through the grates, and then it gets captured quite often, which is a really, really good way of stopping that from entering our ocean. You also get booms put across rivers to try and prevent that. And you may have heard of, for example, the ocean cleanup out in the middle of the ocean of the Pacific, starting to look at cleaning up in the middle of the Pacific. They're also looking at putting some of their technology back inland, as you say, in those smaller water bodies to try and prevent it from going out in the first place. So yeah, there's definitely some solutions out there that are being discovered. And that website that I mentioned earlier, and I've just put it in the chat, shift.how, is a really good place to just look at a whole range of different ideas and solutions to educate yourself, and maybe even think about some of them that you can adopt.
All right, so I popped that website up in a banner as well. We have another question from Mrs. Morrison's sixth graders, and they're wondering if you can tell us about a couple things that you've kind of changed or shifted at home to try and limit your plastic footprint.
He's going on this one. I think Sally and I both have things that we've done in our everyday lives to try and reduce our own personal impact. And so things like trying not to buy synthetic clothing or washing your clothes slightly less frequently. So not every single time that you've worn a top, it needs to go in the washing machine. Because as I mentioned in my talk, a lot of our clothing is made of synthetic fibres that when we wash them, they come out in the wastewater. And now some does get captured in our wastewater facilities, but the fibres are so small that they can go out into the oceans. But I know that both of us have always got our trusty reusable bottles or coffee mugs, cutlery with us, so that if ever we need a drink, we can just fill it up with water from a store rather than buying a plastic bottle. But we can do so many other things as well, thinking big, trying to get a community action group within your community. And even probably a little bit too young for you, but thinking of your parents when they're voting, try and vote for someone with environmental policies, because then they'll put the environment at the top of their agenda. And whether that means plastic or the environment as a whole, making one change in one element will have a net benefit over all the other things. Don't know if Sally's got anything she wants to add in.
Around for that long, really. And so, if we're looking at this, it's taken lots of micro actions to get us to a place where actually we rely on plastic so heavily, and it will just take lots of micro actions to get us back in the other direction. And it's definitely not made easy for us. I think it's definitely quite hard at the moment with COVID-19. You've got some cafes that, for example, aren't accepting reusable cups, but I have still occasionally go and get a coffee. And I've been using the same lid since March, because they won't accept my reusable coffee cup, or looking at an alternative and a store that does. And I think the key here is being adaptable. And if you're happy to adapt to your behaviours, it might be buying a different vegetable that isn't wrapped in plastic in the supermarket and adapting your recipe at home, or it might be kind of making slight changes in your kind of what you do on a day-to-day basis. Maybe sitting in when we're allowed and having that coffee rather than away and using a single cup would be really, really a good way to make a difference at home.
All right. Well, I want to check in with Joe one more time in Wisconsin, see if Joe has another question. You're good, Joe. We can hear you.
I had a question of, like, how do you choose the people to go on the boat?
That's my job, choosing all the people. As really important for us to have a wide range of different people, because ultimately every single one of us uses plastic in one form or another in our lives. And so it's going to take every single one of us to have a part in the solution of reducing our plastic use and coming up with those ideas. They're going to work for lots and lots of different types of people in different jobs, in different places. And so what we really try to do is get a multidisciplinary crew. And so we have an application form on our website. People send that in, they send in a short video. And then I also have an interview with everybody online, because everyone's from around the world. So we have a virtual interview where we discuss what takes place on board, because it is a big decision for those people to want to come on one of our voyages. Because once you're on the boat, you're in the middle of the ocean, there's no getting off. So you need to be really certain about wanting to join in the first place. It's a very different environment to the way most people live at home. So therefore, it's a bit of a two-way conversation about finding the right group of people that will get on well on board, but also with each individual being different, it adds real value and depth to the conversations that we have, learning about the issue in different places, but also sharing ideas and perspectives and different viewpoints on solutions.
All right. Well, first of all, I want to give a huge shout out to the classrooms who joined us live today. Thank you for all your great questions. I think Jo is getting ready for when she turns 18, just making sure she's ready to apply to get out on eXXpedition. Very cool. If you do want to tune in on Monday, we hosted an event with Emily Penn, and she shared kind of her story leading up to eXXpedition. So if you want to see a little bit of that, you can check out our YouTube channel. But Winnie and Sally, it's always great to steal you for a little bit. Thank you so much for sharing a little bit of your stories, a little bit of eXXpedition and the impact it's having all over the world. So thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for joining us.
All right, awesome. Well, thanks again, everyone. We've got lots of events coming up throughout the day today, so you can check out exploringbytheseat.com to see what we have coming up. And we're looking forward to seeing your classrooms again. Thanks, everyone.